How are you?
Back with you on Off the Hook Radio.
It's DJ Buddha Blaze. You know, electric powwow is going on tonight.
That's right, a tribe called Red. Are you going to check them out? Give me a call.
Let me know. Let's get into the latest from nation
To nation, this is Sisters.
Ever to be such a thing as a true universal language, it will most likely be expressed in the realms of mathematics, geometry, energy patterns, and frequency. Could it be that this language, or at least the foundation of it, already exists here on Earth? Is it possible that over the course of thousands of years, we have been somehow guided in the process of creating this new form of communication? And if so, what type of information will be conveyed through it that could not be expressed any other way? In the search for answers, we must be prepared to trek through both time and space, to open our eyes and minds wide enough to notice compelling coincidences, and to stand back far enough to see if the building blocks of some kind of mathematical, spatial, frequency-based language emerge. But before we begin our journey, we will pause here in the present day to notice some of the ways that we measure and tabulate the world around us. This is an important step, for how we count and measure things can be as revealing as why we count them. First, we will take a look at the way we measure time. For all practical purposes, the smallest unit is 1 second, and we all know it takes 60 seconds to make a minute, and then 60 of these minutes to make an hour. This hour, of course, is the unit by which we divide our days, and these days become months, years, decades, centuries, and so on. Speaking of 60, let's take a moment to notice that all geometry, whether it is 2 or 3 dimensional, is also derived from base 60 mathematics that provide the foundation for a 360-degree circle, which in turn provides us with all the angles and formulas for creating virtually every shape known to humankind. Now let's look at how many cultures from all over the world have chosen to count and group things. Right away, we see that we have been attracted to the number 12. 12 eggs in a dozen, 12 months in a year, 12 inches in a foot, 12 signs of the zodiac. Strangely, whether it's tallying disciples or mythical gods, the number 12 appears often in the telling of our greatest stories about ourselves. And what about distance? Your local town might be measured in meters or other units, but when we talk about measuring our planet, the standards we all use revert back to base 60 units of miles, minutes, or geometrical degrees. Are you noticing the pattern here? We seem to be encountering a lot of 12s and 60s. Are they related? And if so, how? To answer that piece of the puzzle, we must travel roughly 5,000 years back in time to visit the ancient Sumerian culture of Mesopotamia, for here is where our 1260-based math comes from. This counting system, which was invented by the same people who produced the world's first written language, involved counting the knuckles of the 4 long fingers on one hand and then multiplying them by all 5 digits on the other hand. If you do this, you will get a maximum number of 12 knuckles times 5 fingers, which of course totals 60. How these cosmic jumps in language and mathematics occurred so suddenly is open to debate, but it is interesting to note that the ancient Sumerians themselves wrote about being given this information by sky god visitors they called the Anunnaki. Who and what the Anunnaki were is a hotly contested subject, but one thing that cannot be denied is the fact that over 5,000 years ago, a mathematical system was born that incredibly still serves us today. So now that we have our various units of measurement, all based on the Sumerian 1260 counting system, let's jump forward to a few pivotal moments in history and see what other numbers, patterns, and synchronicities appear. In the 6th century BC, on the Greek island of Samos, the famed mathematician Pythagoras led a school of thought that married philosophy, mathematics, music, and of course geometry. And while Pythagoras did not discover advanced geometry, he did apply it in new ways, especially to music. For instance, he noticed that when a tauten string was plucked, it would create a tone. And when that string was divided in half, it would make the same tone, only twice as high in pitch. Pythagoras then came up with numerical ratios based on harmonic fifths, and this led to the creation of the musical scale found at the root of most modern music. It is important to note that according to Pythagoras, all musical notes were found by using mathematics, and as such were given number values according to their placement in a kind of master grid. For instance, by using fifths beginning from note number 1, he was eventually guided to note 27. And to find the same note twice as high in pitch, he simply kept doubling it to 54, 108, 216, 432, and so on up the scale. If you've ever heard of Pythagorean tuning, you know that the number 432 is quite important. To Pythagoras himself, it probably wouldn't have stood out more than any other in his numerical grid. But in our quest to find a universal language based on mathematics and frequency, this particular note represents a significant piece of coincidental evidence. You see, many ancient musical instruments, from the Tibetan bowls to Native American flutes, happen to produce the same tone, a tone that vibrates at 442 cycles per second. That's compelling, but even more intriguing is the fact that Pythagoras was not calculating vibration cycles to find tone 432. It just happens to be the same number. What's more, for decades, most modern musical instruments were also tuned to this same 4th octave A, with a value of 432 cycles. How could this be? Who chose this particular note as the keystone for instrument tuning? And more importantly, why? Here is where a deeper mystery begins to emerge, and to explore it, we will need to go back to Pythagoras' other passion, geometry. It is not an exaggeration to say that to Pythagoras and his disciples, geometry and math held the key to the nature of all life everywhere, and maybe it does. Let's look at the first four geometric shapes: the circle, triangle, square, and pentagon. In each of them are angles of degrees that, when added together, always total a specific number relative to that particular shape. For instance, if we take a triangle, the sum total of all three interior angles is always 180. For both the square and circle, it is 360. For a pentagon, it is 540. Now at this moment, let's step back and look at these numbers in a different way, as there seems to be something about them that reaches beyond a simple sum of angles. Did you notice that they happen to be in the same numerical neighborhood as tone 432? What's more, they all add up to 9, just like 432, 2160, the number expressed by both the cube and the term of blackboard. You may have already noticed that without the zero, it is exactly half of our magic 432. That's what's noted. But what is even more intriguing is the way this number keeps showing up in other large-scale measurements. To discover one of these measurements, we will need to jump forward from Plato's time to when the Mayan civilization was flourishing. Roughly 1,500 years ago, Mayan stargazers were the most accomplished astronomers the world had ever known. Their concept of cyclical time led to many incredible discoveries: the accurate length of a year, the exact dates of seasonal changes, even the moments when solar and lunar eclipses would occur. But their most amazing discovery was of something known as the precession of the equinox, which makes note of a very slow wobble of Earth's axis. Somehow aware of the fact that this wobble takes 25,920 years to complete, the Mayans called this cycle one great year, with each of its 12 great months requiring 2160 Earth years to complete. And what about this? Did you know that the diameter of our moon, when measured in miles, also happens to total, you guessed it, 2160? Lastly, watch what happens when we apply simple division to this highly synchronous number. 2160 divided by 2 is 1080, the angle sum of the octagon. By 3, 720, a total of the hexagon. By 4, 540, the pentagon. By 5, are you ready? It's the ketone of 432. And by 6, 360, the number of both the square and the circle. All F sharps and C sharps, with our 432A thrown into the mix, as if it were some kind of clue to solving a cosmic riddle. Maybe we should look at this number even more closely. As we've stated, our closest celestial neighbor, the moon, is 2160 miles across, and 216 is exactly half of 432. What about the other large object in our sky? Were you aware that our sun is 864,000 miles across? Incredibly, where the moon's base number sequence is half of 432, the sun's number sequence is exactly twice 432. And do you know how many seconds there are in a day? 86,400, or 43,200 for the 12 hours of day, and 43,200 for the 12 hours of night. Or try this. Take the 360 degrees found in the circular shape of our sun and moon, and then multiply it by the 12 hours of either day or night. The answer? 4320. Or how about this? What is the only whole number that, when squared, comes to within 0.01% accuracy to measuring the speed of light? 432. What is going on here? We have all these different things: Earth cycles, time and celestial measurements, geometry, sonic frequency, yet they are all represented by the same numbers over and over again. To answer that, we must search for the factor common to all of them, and that common factor is the 5,000-year-old Sumerian 1260 counting system. It is what gave us the inches to a foot, the seconds to a minute, and the 360 degrees in geometry. It's almost as if the sky god visitors, who the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, provided humanity with a counting system that would lead to the discovery of these synchronicities. Could it be that the number 432 really is some kind of cosmic key that unlocks a language of higher understanding? And if so, have these sky visitors ever been back to make sure we don't miss the importance of the 432 matrix? One possible answer can be found in the story of a man named George Van Tassel. a respected aeronautical engineer who believed he was contacted by extraterrestrial beings in the early 1950s. During this encounter, Van Tassel said he was provided with a mathematical formula that could be used for everything from time travel to sound frequency healing, and which he used to build the world-famous Integratron near Joshua Tree, California. What is this formula? It is F equals 1 over T, or frequency equals one particular something divided by the number of time. Well, what if that one something was the biggest one on our planet? The one great year of 25,920 discovered by the Mayans. And what if the number for time was the most logical choice of 60? Suddenly, this mysterious equation is expressed as frequency equals 25,920 divided by 60. Are you ready for the answer? It's 432. Not only the frequency that instruments all over the world have been tuned to for thousands of years, but also the number that reveals the synchronistic nature of life on this planet. Noticing all these coincidences revealed by the 432 matrix and the Sumerian counting system, we must wonder if other ancient cultures were aware of them as well. Just scratching the surface, it would seem that they were. For example, let's take the Sumerian 12 and square it for a total of 144. Right off, we see there is indeed a number and tone contained within our factor 9 grid. Expanding outward, we find 1440, then 144,000, which is a number that appears all over the world in the most compelling of ways. Take, for instance, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It happens to have been covered with 144,000 smooth white casing stones. To ancient Mayans, 144,000 days was the length of their 394-year back tomb, a time cycle which has just begun again. In the Bible, we read that there will be 144,000 chosen ones, redeemed from the earth prior to the apocalypse. Obviously, number sequences like these have been significant to many different cultures and religious sects, and to one enigmatic group in particular, the Freemasons. Were the earliest Masons, the supposed keepers of sacred information, also aware of the factor 9 grid, the 432T, and the number 144,000? Their infatuation with the numbers 3 and 13 might be telling. For instance, if you divide 144,000 by 432, the answer is 333.3 into infinity. Or take a look at the back of a dollar bill. That famous unfinished pyramid could be revealing some interesting clues. For instance, there are 13 steps climbing the pyramid, and 13 times 33.3 is 432. Even the shape of the flat-top pyramid seems to be made as if someone had drawn 4 dots in a line, then 3 above it, then 2 above that, and then connected those dots to reveal this iconic shape. And of course, let's not forget that the square root of our all-important factor 9 grid is 3 threes. Who else knew about 432? The answer is surprising. In India, large cycles of time are called Kali Yugas, and each one is 432,000 years long. In fact, the number 432 appears so often in sacred structures and myths, from Stonehenge to the pyramids, that author Joseph Campbell could not help but see it as the most important mythological moment in history. So what do we have here? What is it that's trying to be expressed by all of these coincidences? One answer is that over the course of history, we have been somehow guided toward both the subconscious creation and eventual conscious recognition of a grand pattern based on frequency, mathematics, time, space, and geometry. Quite possibly, these synchronistic numbers, shapes, and tones represent the building blocks of a language that we do not yet fully understand, but could turn out to be the most important language we have ever learned. How will we use it? Who will we be conversing with? Time will tell. Thousands of years ago, from locations all over the globe, various prophets, shamans, and seers described an era when humanity would make some kind of cosmic leap into a next level of consciousness. Here, at the dawning of the age of Aquarius and the start of a new Mayan baptism cycle, maybe it's happening.
You're dealing with an addicted generation.
This is a big time bomb ticking.
This is no accident. Indeed, it is by design.
I mean, seriously?
It was my mistake.
I mean, I think we can all feel it.
To try to make these products as addictive as possible.
Spike in dopamine.
We now know that many of the major social media companies hire individuals called attention engineers who borrow principles from Las Vegas casino gambling, among other places. to try to make these products as addictive as possible. That is the desired use case of these products, is that you use it in an addictive fashion because that maximizes the profit that can be extracted from your attention and data.
It literally is a point now where I think we have created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. That is truly where we are.
The way the technologist Darren Lanier puts it is that these companies offer you shiny treats in exchange for minutes of your attention and bytes of your personal data, which can then be packaged up and sold.
What happened is that the attention economy and this race for attention got more and more competitive. And the more competitive it got to get people's attention on, say, a news website, the more they need to add these design principles, these more manipulative design tactics, as ways of holding on to your attention.
You don't realize it, but you are being programmed.
Social media tools are designed to be addictive. The actual desired use case of these tools is that you fragment your attention as much as possible throughout your waking hours. That's how these tools are designed to use. Well, we have a growing amount of research which tells us that if you spend large portions of your day in a state of fragmented attention, so large portions of your day where you're constantly breaking up your attention, take a quick glance, do a just check, and just quickly look at Instagram, that this can permanently reduce your capacity for concentration. I'm especially worried about this when we look at the younger generation coming up, which is the most saturated in this technology.
It's very addictive because if you pull on the slot machine arm enough, you will win. And you never know which pull will reward you.
That's an addictive behavior, and it's dopamine that is driving that addiction. So what happens with social media is Robert Sapolsky, who did the foundational research on this at Stanford, calls it the magic of maybe. When you look at your phone and maybe there's a text there and maybe there's not, and you don't know, when it shows up, that high you get, that's dopamine. It's the magic of maybe. Maybe it'll be there, maybe it won't. When it shows up, you get a 400% spike in dopamine. That is roughly the same amount of dopamine as you're getting from cocaine. It's slightly less than an extremely addictive drug like cocaine. And that's what's happening.
We really care what other people think of us. So for example, when you upload a new profile photo of yourself on Facebook, that's a moment where our mind is very vulnerable to knowing what other people think of my new profile photo. And so when we get new likes on our profile photo, Facebook, knowing this, could actually message me and say, oh, you have new likes on your profile photo. And it knows that we'll be vulnerable to that moment because we all really care about when we're tagged in a photo or when we have a new profile photo. And the thing is that they control the dial, the technology companies control the dial for when and how long your profile photo shows up on other people's news feeds. So they can orchestrate it so that other people more often end up liking your profile photo over a delayed period of time, for example, so that you end up having to more frequently come back and see what the new likes are.
And it's literally rewiring our brain. Even social media, the challenge is, with these terms like Facebook depression and everything.
What's that?
This is social media depression because whereas everyone's looking at their feed and they're comparing their lives to other people, their highlights of other people's lives.
Wow.
And there's actually less life satisfaction, more sadness, depression, and stuff like that.
And it's interesting because if you think about things that routinely produce a lot of dopamine, alcohol, for example, there's a drinking age, right? We have a drinking age. The alcohol releases a whole lot of dopamine. It makes you feel really, really good. We say, okay, you can have that, but you've got to wait. You've got to be 21 years old. We don't do that with social media. We're, essentially putting highly addictive drugs into the hands of kids before they have any natural defenses against them. And what you're seeing with internet addiction, with social media addiction, is the same thing over and over. It's people trying to change their state of consciousness with a device, trying to get at the underlying neurochemical chemistry, and it's very, very addictive.
And so I would say the problem with the gadgets, they're amazing things, is that they approximately interfere with medium to long-term goals, I would say. And so I think the first thing you have to do to bring them under control is figure out what it is that their use is interfering with. It has to be something important. So you think, well, I want to do something important. Well, what is that? Oh, it could be personal. Maybe you want to have a relationship, you want to get married, you want to have kids. You want to have a career that's meaningful. You know, you want to have a life. You want to have an Abrahamic adventure and be the father of nations, let's say. Well, you can't be ratting away on your cell phone and doing that. And so I think part of it is to set your sights high and make a plan and figure out who you could be and see if obsessive utilization of smartphone fits into that vision of nobility. And it will partly, because they're unbelievably powerful communication devices. But so often it's for lack of something better to do, and it also interferes.
You know, imagine like when you take that to the extreme, where, you know, bad actors can now manipulate large swaths of people to do anything you want. It's a really, really bad state of affairs. And we compound the problem, right? We curate our lives around this perceived sense of perfection because we get rewarded in these short-term signals, hearts, likes, thumbs up, and we conflate that with value and we conflate it with truth. And instead what it really is fake, brittle popularity. That's short-term and that leaves you even more, and admit it, vacant and empty before you get it. Because then it forces you into this vicious cycle where you're like, what's the next thing I need to do now? Because I need it back. Think about that compounded by 2 billion people. And then think about how people react then to the perceptions of others. It's really bad.
So we know from the research literature that the more you use social media, the more likely you are to feel lonely or isolated. We know that the constant exposure to your friends' carefully curated positive portrayals of their life can leave you to feel inadequate and can increase rates of depression. And something I think we're going to be hearing more about in the near future is that there's a fundamental mismatch between the way our brains are wired and this behavior of exposing yourself to stimuli with intermittent rewards throughout all of your waking hours. So it's one thing to spend a couple hours at the slot machine in Las Vegas, but if you bring a slot machine with you and you pull that handle all day long from when you wake up to when you go to bed, we're not wired from it. It short circuits the brain, and we're starting to find that it has actual cognitive consequences, one of them being this sort of pervasive background hum of anxiety.
Here's the thing, the world we live in isn't real. Social media isn't real. And by design, social media rewards us for showing our best life. The edited, posed, champagne, Michelin star, holiday, orchestrated best angle of our life, the highlight reel. But you don't ever see real life, the 99% of our lives, the behind the scenes, the unglamorous, unfiltered, day-to-day, bland normality. And you end up comparing your behind the scenes to other people's fake highlight reels and using others as a mirror or benchmark for how you should look, how successful you should be, or how you should live. These fake comparisons will only serve to make you feel inadequate and inferior to something that isn't even real. Research continually shows that comparing your life to someone else's creates envy, low self-confidence, low self-esteem, and depression. You compare yourself to other people every single day, consciously or subconsciously, and no matter what I say, you're not going to stop because comparing one thing to another is a natural human thing to do. Whether we want to admit it or not, a big reason why anything has value is because there's something worse or better to compare it to. Think about it. An old brick of a mobile phone with a big aerial is only considered amazing in a world before the smartphone. The horse and carriage is only considered a phenomenal mode of transport until the car comes along. The answer isn't to stop making comparisons, because unfortunately we can't control that. But you have to change the object of your comparison from someone else to yourself. You have to measure yourself against yourself. And by doing this, you start at a base point where you consider yourself to be perfectly fine exactly how you are. But it also is the most effective, motivating, and healthy way to work to improve yourself. You'll become your happiest self when you stop putting pressure on yourself to be more like someone else, and when you start comparing real to real.
We are in a really bad state of affairs right now, in my opinion. It is eroding the core foundations of how people behave by and between each other. And I don't have a good solution. You know, my solution is I just don't use these tools anymore. I haven't for years. It's created huge tension with my friends, huge tensions in my social circles. If you look at my Facebook feed, I've posted maybe 2 times in 7 years. 3 times, 5 times, it's less than 10. And it's weird, I guess I kind of just innately didn't want to get programmed. And so I just tuned it out, but I didn't confront it. And now to see what's happening, it really bums me out.
Back in the 1970s and the early 80s at Xerox PARC, when Steve Jobs first went over and saw the graphical user interface, the way people talked about computers and what computers were supposed to be was a bicycle for our minds. That here we are, you take a human being, and they have a certain set of capacities and capabilities, and then you give them a bicycle, and they can go to all these new distances. They're empowered to go to these brand new places and to do these new things, to have these new capacities. And that's always been the philosophy of people who make technologies. How do we create bicycles for our minds to do and empower us to feel and access more? Now, when the first iPhone was introduced, it was also the philosophy of these technologies. How do we empower people to do something more? And in those days, it wasn't manipulative because there was no competition for attention. Photoshop wasn't trying to maximize how much attention it took from you. It didn't measure its success that way. And the internet overall had been in the very beginning not designed to maximize attention. It was just putting things out there, creating these message boards. It wasn't designed with this whole persuasive psychology that emerged later.
If you feed the beast, that beast will destroy you. If you push back on it, we have a chance to control it and rein it in. And it is a point in time where people need to hard break from some of these tools and the things that you rely on. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. No civil discourse, no cooperation, misinformation, mistruth, and it's not an American problem. This is not about Russian ads. This is a global problem.
Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
In the place to be, and I got what it takes to rock the mic right. Yo, half the world starving, the others trying to lose weight, judging each other on who's great, yo, and who's fake. I choose faith and elevate through all my lucid dreaming, and wake up and celebrate all the human beings. My mom said it's a blessing when they try to stop you. This is that rhyming up your third eye, your line, your chakras. Spark this to the darkness, what I teach is dangerous. I'm just trying to free my people from the deepest anguish. I've seen evil spirits from the matrix respond to the name of Jesus in the English language. Was it the God in me, or am I blinded? Was it terminology or goodness behind it? We got a long way to go to get back to where we were. This life is a mystery, eyes are very blurred. No matter what religion you follow, I respect it. We all human beings, that means we all connected. They want to tell you what you can and what you can't do, but everything traditional was once brand new. Jump on social media, change my Wikipedia, find out where they leading you and what they feeding you. Yo, it's evil. How bad they want their money. They let us eat food that's banned in other countries. It's a damn shame how they campaign by a brand name champagne, but I can't blame. We all got free will to choose like hand games. We all got free will to choose like hand games. Prayers up, tobacco down, healing frequencies, now that's a sound. Human beings, Mexico, kids in cages, now let them go. Prayers up, tobacco down, healing frequencies, now that's the sound. Human beings, Mexico, kids in cages, now let them go, let them go, let them go.
Now, one way of modeling how the brain operates is as though there are two systems at work. Psychologists call them System 1 and System 2, but maybe it's useful to think of them as characters. So let's call System 1 Gun and System 2 Drew. You are Drew. He represents your conscious thought, the voice in your head.
I am who you think you are.
He's the one capable of following instructions. He can execute a series of steps. If you're asked to calculate 13 times 17 in your head, for example, he's the one who has to do it.
Can I just use my calculator?
No.
All right. 17 times.
Drew is lazy. It takes effort to get Drew to do anything, and he is slow. But he's the careful one, capable of catching and fixing mistakes.
221.
Now meet System 1, Gun. He is incredibly quick, which he needs to be since he's constantly processing copious amounts of information coming in through your senses. He picks out the relevant bits and discards the rest, which is most of it. And he works automatically, without you, Drew, being consciously aware of what he is doing. For example, when you spot some text, he reads it before you can even decide whether or not you want to read it. Gun fills in the gaps. For example, what does this say? Did you notice that the H in the and the A in cat are actually the same symbol? But you had no trouble reading it because Gun made the correct automatic assumption. So although Drew is unaware of what Gun is doing, it's Gun's perceptions that become the basis for your conscious thoughts. The way I like to think of it, each of these characters is related to one of your main memory structures. Gun's automatic responses are made possible by long-term memory, the library of experiences you've built up over your lifetime. In contrast, Drew exists entirely within working memory, so he's only capable of holding 4 or 5 novel things in mind at a time. This is perhaps one of the best known findings from psychology, that our capacity to hold and manipulate novel information is incredibly limited, like when trying to remember a string of random numbers.
6, 7, 5, 5, 3, 1.
Yes! But we are able to overcome these limitations if the information is familiar to us. For example, let me give you 4 random digits, 7, 1, 0, 2. Now these would normally take up most of your working memory capacity just to remember, but if you reverse them, 2017, they are now just one thing, the present year. The process of grouping things together according to your prior knowledge is called chunking, and you can actually hold 4 or 5 chunks in working memory at once. So the larger the chunks, the more information you can actively manipulate at one time. Learning is then the process of building more and bigger chunks by storing and further connecting information in long-term memory, essentially passing off tasks from Drew to Gun. But in order for this to happen, Drew first has to engage with the information actively and effortfully, often multiple times. For example, when you were first learning to tie your shoelaces, you probably recited a rhyme to help you remember what to do next, using up all your working memory in the process. But after doing it over and over and over again, it gradually became automatic. That is, Drew doesn't have to think about it anymore because Gun's got it. Musicians and sports stars refer to this as muscle memory, though of course the memory is not in the muscles, it's still in the brain, just controlled by Gun.
You can practice everything exactly as it is and exactly as it's written, but at just such a speed that you have to think about and know exactly where you are and what your fingers are doing and what it feels like.
Slow, deliberate, conscious practice repeated often enough leads to this. I bet 99% of the time, what appears to be superhuman ability comes down to the incredible automation skills of Gun, developed through the painstaking, deliberate practice of Drew. What's interesting is it's actually possible to see how hard Drew is working just by looking at someone. Try this task. I'm going to show you 4 digits. I want you to read them out loud, and then after 2 beats, I want you to say each number back on the beat, but adding 1 to each digit. So as an example, 7291 should be 8302. This is called the add 1 task, and it forces Drew to hold these digits in memory while making manipulations to them. Now it's important to say the numbers back on the beat. Try this one. To make it harder, you can try adding 3 instead of 1. Ready? Now what you're unaware of is that as you're completing this task, your pupils are dilating. When Drew is hard at work, as he is in this task, you have a physiological response, including increased heart rate, sweat production, and pupil dilation. Watch how the pupils of these participants enlarge as they perform the add 1 and add 3 tasks.
4, 3, 9, 7, 2. 5, 4, 0, 8, 3.
Excellent. Nicely done. I know. That's the point.
6, 9, 1, 6. 7, 0, 2, 7.
When this research was originally carried out, the researchers made a surprising observation. When the participants were not engaged with the task but were just chatting with the experimenters, their pupils didn't really dilate at all. This indicates that the Add 1 and Add 3 tasks are particularly strenuous for System 2, and that most of our day-to-day life is a stroll for Drew, with most tasks handled automatically by Gun. Just as we spend a lot of our lives lounging around, our brains spend most of their time doing the mental equivalent. And I don't mean to make that sound like a bad thing. This is how our brains evolved to make the best use of resources. For repetitive tasks, we developed automatic ways of doing things, reserving Drew's limited capacity for things that really need our attention. But in some circumstances, there can be mix-ups. For example, I moved to Australia in 2004, and one of the first things I learned was that to turn the lights on, you flick the switch down. My whole life growing up in Canada, Gun had automated that up means on. So no matter how well Drew, knew that down was on in Australia, I would for years continually switch the lights off when entering a room and on when leaving. When Destin learned to ride the backwards bicycle with its steering reversed, it took months to overcome his automated habit. And once he had done that, he couldn't easily go back to riding a normal bike. Understanding Gun and Drew also explains errors in the bat and ball question. It's Gun who first perceives the key pieces of information. Together the bat and ball cost $1.10, the bat costs $1 more than the ball, so the ball costs 10 cents.
10 cents.
Gun immediately had an answer that he blurted out automatically. Meanwhile, Drew, without being consciously aware that the answer came from Gun, endorsed the idea without checking it. After all, the answer sounded reasonable and Drew is lazy. So how do you get Drew to do more work? Well, researchers have found at least one way. When they gave out a clearly printed test, including the bat and ball question, to incoming college students, 85% got at least one wrong. But when they printed the test in a hard-to-read font with poor contrast, the error rate dropped to 35%. A harder-to-read test resulted in more correct answers. And the explanation for this is simple. Since Gun can't quickly jump to an answer, he hands off the task to Drew, who then invests the required mental effort to reason his way to the correct answer. When something is confusing, Drew works harder, and when Drew works harder, you're more likely to reach the right answer and remember the experience. This is something I think the advertising industry knows about and is using to its advantage. A few years ago, again in Australia, I saw a giant billboard that had just 2 letters on it, UN. There was no logo, no indication of what it was for, and this seems to go against all the basic principles of advertising, to show what the product does, how it's better than the competition, and use clear branding and maybe a jingle to make it memorable. The goal is usually to make the message as easy to understand as possible, so Drew doesn't have to work very hard. But if you look at a lot of effective advertising today, it's changed to be more confusing. As the UN campaign rolled out across Sydney, I saw ads like this one in bus shelters. Unexplained. With UN, there is no stress, just unstress. No hassle, just unhassle. With UN, you can undo what you did. You can undrive through the car wash with the window down, or unbreak dance in front of your teenage son and his mates. UN makes life relaxing and unreal. Un your life. Be happy and live for now. Don't worry, unworry. Can you guess what the ads were for? They're actually for insurance. Now that advertising is everywhere, Gun is skilled at filtering it out. It's automatic. If I just saw another insurance ad, I never would have given it a second thought. But something that doesn't make sense? That's something Gun can't deal with, so he hands it off to Drew. This same realization has been happening in education. Lectures, which have long been the dominant teaching method, are now on the decline. Like the old form of advertising, they're too easy to tune out. And often, especially in science lectures, too many new pieces of information are presented, and that exceeds Drew's capacity because he doesn't have big enough chunks to break the material into. In place of lectures, universities are introducing workshops, peer instruction, and formats where students are forced to answer more questions, do more work than just listen and take notes. And this will undoubtedly make Drew work harder, which is good because that's how learning happens. But a lot of students don't like it because it requires more effort. Just as it's hard to motivate someone to get off the couch and exercise, it's hard to get Drew to give his full effort. There's an appeal to doing things you already know, for the musician to play the same familiar songs that Gun has already automated that feel and sound good, to watch videos that give you the sensation of understanding without actually learning anything, to always drive with the GPS on so you never get lost but you also never learn the way. If you really want to learn and get better at anything, have any chance of becoming an expert, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. Because thinking takes effort. It involves fighting through confusion, and for most of us, that's at least somewhat unpleasant.
getting so absolutely fed up with the way things are going. Because I don't think people realize that, while they're talking about China's social credit score system, the infrastructure for such a system is being put in here as we speak. Actually, it's being put in all over the place. I'm just saying, we've all been conditioned through this technology to already accept such a system. That's what dopamine-driven social validation feedback loops do. It gets people hooked on a system of likes and hearts and gotta get more likes on my next meme and stuff like that.
We have created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works.
It's total Pavlovian conditioning with basically the ding of a bell. But we're starting to see these Silicon Valley corporations become so entrenched that if you have a low ranking or something you do on there is considered bad, you're kicked off. And I'm not just talking about the censorship on YouTube. That's just one aspect where obviously dissident thoughts are being punished by deplatforming people. I'm talking about other things, like they've now approved life insurance companies to raise people's premiums based upon their social media posts. Earlier this year, it was announced that Uber was going to start banning people who had low ratings because the system is set up that the riders can rate their drivers, but the drivers can also rate their rider.
Uber's global community guidelines were created with those same common values in mind.
There's standards to make your experience with Uber feel respectful, inclusive, and safe.
So if you take Uber and you're having a bad day, you're going to get a low rating. Have enough bad days, you won't be able to take Uber anymore. So you better hope you have an alternative form of transportation because your social credit with Uber will be null and void and they'll just kick you out. Same with Airbnb. If you get low enough ratings on there, they will kick you off of Airbnb and they won't tell you why. That's the other thing. They don't have to tell you because this is pure corporatocracy. This is an extrajudicial situation. They can kick you off for whatever reason they've deemed, and then you're done, and there's no appeal, and you don't even get to find out why. So these social credit rankings that we're slowly seeing get moved in here and there on various platforms are starting to have real-world consequences and effects. And this is something that is spreading out all over the world over. So it's not just going to be America, but we are definitely on the path to having a very similar system put in here. It's being done very gradually, but it's the same thing. What really burns me about it, besides the fact that it's just incredibly unfair as far as fairness even goes, is the people who run these companies and the behaviors that they are engaged in. Some of these people are the last people on earth who should be allowed to determine other people's social credit ranking or score or whatever, okay? The last people. And they're going to obviously be outside of such a system. But they should not be the ones being allowed to institute it. What do I mean by that? Back in 1999, Stanley Kubrick came out with the film Eyes Wide Shut. And that was a pretty shocking film, I think, for most people who saw it. At the time, I don't think a lot of people were aware that people in high positions of authority and power behaved in those kinds of ways. I don't even think that kind of behavior crossed the average person's mind. Of course, I was a teenager when that movie came out, so I didn't even have the research background to understand it when I saw it. It's pretty shocking. I didn't get it. So it's been 20 years now since that movie came out, and we are now to a point in society where the concepts in that movie have become normalized and just accepted, and that's just the way it is, to the point that last year an article came out in Vanity Fair discussing how Silicon Valley's elite, powerful elite men who are running these corporations in Silicon Valley that are affecting everything from the way that we as a society communicate with each other to the way that we transact and do business, they're participating in these massive orgy parties on so normalized that in this article in Vanity Fair that talks about this, the shock and outrage is not, hey, these really powerful people that are running things are behaving in these ways. That's fine. It's, hey, it's kind of sexist the way they're doing things because, you know, the women feel pressured to participate, and that's really unfair to the women. So it's not shock and outrage that it's going on, or that this is the way these people who are running things essentially behave. The new ruling class of the Bilderberg elite, Silicon Valley. No, that's fine. It's just that it's not fair to the women because it's not taking into account the fact that they don't want to behave that way. It's just kind of mind-blowing. So I went and read this lady's book because she interviewed a bunch of people in Silicon Valley for this book, including a lot of people who participate in these kinds of behaviors. And she talks about how, you know, there's a strip club there. It's right down the street from the Yelp headquarters. So what is Yelp? Yelp is a company that if your social ratings on Yelp aren't very good as a business, you're going to get your business hurt by that. The people who run Yelp use this strip club down the street, which she interviewed some of the girls that work there. Apparently you can pay for full sex in the back, or pretty much whatever you want, sounds like. They use that as an extra conference room. That's how often they're there, okay? Meanwhile, their platform can hurt your business. This is the point I'm trying to make. So she's interviewing people for this book, and this one lady who tried to be an entrepreneur out there, she talked about how if you don't participate in an orgy, you get relegated to the uncool kids table. She says, rather than finding it odd that she would attend a sex party, this entrepreneur said that people would be confused about her not attending. The fact that you don't go is weird. So, Eyes Wide Shut is the norm. Here's another passage. This is a strange place that has created incredible things in the world and therefore attracts these types of people and enables these types of people. How could it be anything but weird and dramatic and people on the edge testing everything? If you thought like everyone else, you can't invent the future. So those are the people that are inventing society's future. Here's another one. They don't see themselves as predatory, of course. When they look in the mirror, they see individuals setting a new paradigm of behavior by pushing the boundaries of social mores and values. What's making this possible is the same progressiveness and open-mindedness that allowed us to be creative and disruptive about our ideas. Founder X told her. It's like all these people in this book are anonymous. Not the point. The point is it's accepted that they all go to these weird weekend orgies and cuddle puddles. They call them cuddle puddles, which just... ugh. I mean... ugh. Okay? But these are the people that are running the companies that are going to be determining the social credit of everyone else. And they are morally bankrupt. Do you see the point that I'm trying to make? And that's just normalized and institutionalized in the way it is. Do you need any further proof that we're living in the upside down? So when people go to YouTube and the number 2 trending video is a video about glorifying Lucifer, I mean, is it really that much of a surprise? I don't think people realize that the fabric of society isn't just being frayed, it's being torn apart. I just don't think people realize how quickly this is happening.
We have created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. That is truly where we are.
We live in the upside down.